it a boy or a girl? É rapaz ou rapariga? É menino ou menina? Is het een jongen of een meisje? Not again. This is the question I was asked the most when I was pregnant, especially for the first time. My husband used to joke and say, I'll let you know in 18 years. But it's actually an interesting question. If you look up what the gender terms currently available are: transgender, two-spirit, cisgender, non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid, and that's that. Now, the Portuguese language only has two genders: masculine and feminine. I hope you now feel a bit more relieved. Today I will ask you, with the ultimate quest, one of the biggest issues foreigners have when learning Portuguese, which is looking at a word and being able to tell if it's a boy or a girl. What I will also do is share with you 14 words, nouns, that mean one thing when they're masculine and another thing when they're feminine. Hello, I'm Katarina. I'm a language fanatic, and here at the Language Unschool I share out-of-the-box tips to help you understand and be understood in European Portuguese. Actually, gender is not a black or white topic because it has many implications in the language. It affects everything. In all the 10 foreign languages that I've learned, I think Dutch was the most confusing in terms of gender. They have the neutral gender, but you cannot really tell by looking at the word. So the word boy and girl, man, woman, guy, these are all words that refer to people of two different genders, and they can be confusing. When you're living in Portugal, you might hear several. So let me quickly explain how to refer to a boy or a girl in Portuguese. So, is it a boy or a girl? In Portuguese, that's normally asked as é menino ou menina. We also have another option, which is é rapaz ou rapariga. I know, so this last option is less common, and usually the words rapaz and rapariga refer to slightly older children, but you can still hear both, and it's important to, not necessarily if you're scared of the R at the beginning of words and you want to avoid it, fine, but you need to at least be able to identify when you hear the word, okay? Menina is also an interesting word because it can be used as miss in English. I get called miss a lot when I go to a small shop or the market, that kind of environment, and I love it because it makes me feel super young. We also have the words miúdo and miúda, which can be the equivalent of kids in English. But note that if you're talking about your own kids, you do not have to say that they are yours. It's obvious from context. So if you specifically use the word miúdos, you would say vou levar os miúdos ao futebol. You don't have to say os meus miúdos. If you say miúdos, is enough to imply it from context if you don't add anything, someone else's kids. But it should be clear that it's your own kids. Vou levar os miúdos ao futebol. Or if you use the more formal word for your own children, then vou levar os meus filhos à escola. If you skip the my, os meus, then it's confusing. Vou levar os filhos à escola, and then the person will be wondering whose kids, like whose children. Then you need to specify. In the odd case that, or not, but in the case that you work with kids yourself, then you could say vamos levar os miúdos à praia, or vamos levar as crianças à praia. Now, depending on the area you live in Portugal, you might also hear the words gaiato and gaiata for boy and girl, or cachopo, cachopa, which are all synonyms for kid. As for gajo and gaja, it's a word that you would use when you don't remember someone's name, or you simply don't want to mention it. It's sort of similar to the word guy in English, but I think even more informal and could be offensive, especially when said about a woman. So it's one to be a bit more careful about, okay? Vi todas as séries. Série ends with an E. Now it's plural, so you have an S, but if you remove the S, you have an E at the end. E's at the end normally indicate that the word is feminine. Okay, it's a rule, but obviously there's always an exception to the exception to the exception. Still, the word in isolation, if you learn words in isolation, it will be much harder to learn both the meaning of the word, of course this one is the same in English, but imagine it wasn't, and the gender. So gender and the word should always come together. But even then, it's a big effort for you to memorize them. There's a lot of information coming your way. So how to do that? Read, or when you listen. But reading certainly helps, because if you have a whole sentence, in this case, small phrase, vi as séries todas, you look around the word and then you pay attention. If that's the focus of the exercise, what you're doing, you're reading a page. Forget about understanding what the meaning of the words. Of course, you could do that as well, but maybe now what you want is focus on gender. So you start underlining, looking at the words around it. Are there A's? Are there O's? And that will give you an indication that série is a série. You could also use mnemonics for that. With my Unschoolers, I use lipstick, so sexy lips for female words, and then a moustache for masculine words. I use the visual ones because most people are visual learners, but you could also have some sort of sound associated with it. So think of a woman yelling when you think of a series. Now let's talk about 14 words that change meaning when masculine or feminine. And I love this kind of words. It's words that it took me a while to build the list, because then I said them, or I read them, or I heard them, and I was like, oh wow, yeah, if you change the gender of this one, it means something else. And it's amazing, because it shows that how putting things in a box doesn't always work, and that how language is much more complex than that. Okay, so here we go. Number 1, o branco. This means the color, and color, in case you don't know, is feminine, a cor. But when we talk about the color just by itself, we say o branco. For example, give me this or that. Oh, dá-me o branco. There's an expression which is ter uma branca. That means lapso momentâneo de memória. So when you don't remember something just for now, like I can't think of the word for it. Tive uma branca, desculpa. Okay, number 2, you know the word livre, right? Book. And then you hear someone say livre, you go, livre. But livro is masculine. Like, how come the person is saying livre? Livre is not a noun, and I'm cheating again here, but it's an interjection. So it's something you may hear and you go like, oh, I thought it was o livro, not a livre. And it's not a livre, it's livre. When you do not want to swear, livre will be a good option. Sort of like a soft core. It's not a hardcore swear word, palavrão. You need to expose yourself to the culture, to the language, to see this in context. So I really advise you to check my mini tuga 6 resources that I'm sure the Little Prince will not show this, but the rest may. Número 3, o prato, the plate, or a prata. This one, a prata means silver, and it's funny that silver, same word as plate. Not sure what the origin of it is. But there you go, now you know it. Número 4. Now, I know a lot of you listen to the radio, which is a great way to learn Portuguese. Always more exposure, the better. But how to say this? Same word as in English. Rádio. But is it masculine or feminine? So, no, it's actually both, but they mean different things. So if you say o rádio, you're talking about the aparelho, so the actual radio thingy, if it's in the car, that thing that you can perhaps remove or have at home and move it around. But if you're talking about the radio station, then it's feminine, then it's a rádio. This one is particularly annoying, still interesting. So o jarro is a jar, but you put water in it. O jarro d'água. If you put flowers, then it's a jarra de flores. Número 6. Que é isto? What is this? A cabeça, the head. Feminine, fine, ends with an A, clear. But what if you say o cabeça? What does that mean? It is the leader of something. And even for a woman, you would refer a Catarina é o cabeça do grupo não sei do quê. Número 7. A caixa. Isto é uma caixa de cartas. A box, feminine. But you can say o caixa. If you work at the till of a supermarket, then you are o caixa do supermercado. If we're talking about moving boxes, which assuming most of you would have moved to Portugal, then the moving box, so it's not a box, it's a box. We have a word for it, o caixote, and then it's masculine. Número 8. O guia, the guide, as in a book that gives you information about hotels, restaurants, something about a city or a town or a country. And then we also have a guia. And that a guia is a document that, I have to read this in Portuguese. Documento que acompanha uma pessoa ou uma encomenda até à sua entrega. So, there you go. Probably less likely for you to use that one, but now you know. What I didn't know is that a guia is also the extremities of moustache, bigode. How useful is that? Número 9. This is serious. So, o moral, masculine, is, it's like your mood. How is your mood today? Estou com moral em baixo. Okay, you don't feel good psychologically, whatever. But if you use the feminine version, moral, so you just change the article, the word doesn't change at all, then we're talking about the moral. Conjunto de regras de conduta. Número 10, we have yet another color. Interesting because the color violet is as white. It is o violeta when we refer to the color. But if we say in the feminine, a violeta, then we're talking about the flower. Número 11, o nascente. So it ends with an E. You would think, oh, it's feminine. Well, it is, but also isn't. So o nascente means the side where the sun rises, meaning east. O nascente. But then when we say a nascente, that means the origin of where water comes from. So a nascente d'água. And it means origin as well, just by itself. Número 12, a capital. I'm starting with the easiest one. So the capital of a country. A capital de Portugal é Lisboa. But if we say o capital, then we're talking about money. Okay, so the amount of money that a company has. Número 13 is one of those words I guess you don't hear in a language class, but so you've never came across it now. Hopefully it will stick. We have o lixo, the garbage, the trash, and then we have a lixa, and that is sandpaper. The last one, número 14, is a ponta, and that means the tip, so a ponta do dedo. But if it's masculine, it actually has tons of meanings. I'll just name a few. So, o ponto. Actually, if I say I think of the dot, that's the first thing that comes to mind, but it also brings back memories. So when I was at school, we had o livro de ponto. O livro de ponto was this book where you had everyone's names and which the teacher would call everyone out and see who was present and who was not. We had to say present, present. It also means a stitch if you do sewing. It could also mean a score that you had of some kind, pontos. It's also a synonym for test, but less used. Okay. We also have this expression of estar no ponto, meaning it's if you're cooking something and it's cooked really well, like pasta, let's say, if you don't cook it al dente, it's passou do ponto. Estar no ponto is like cooked exactly at the right moment it should be cooked. Then you have às 3 em ponto. So when you're talking about the time, you say we're meeting at 3 sharp. So this idea of sharp is em ponto in Portuguese. And then it also means a teleprompter, which in the old days would be an actual person. These days we have machines for that. If you want to put some of the knowledge you've gained today to use, I'm opening up the comments down below. So feel free to write a couple of sentences with a few of the words that you've learned today, and I'll have a look at them later. If this was a lot of information, you need to relax a bit, watch this video and just take in the sounds of the trickiest consonants in Portuguese. Até a próxima!